What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Mailari. So in today's episode, I'm going to break down the NBA trade deadline from a few weeks ago. I've been meaning to put out an episode with my reactions, but haven't really gotten a moment to do so. So today I'm going to do that. A lot of trades to break down. The biggest one, in my opinion, was the James Harden-Darius Garland trade between the Cavaliers and the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers had a midseason pivot from trying to continue their resurgence and make a run in the West to potentially rebuilding and thinking of their future. I expected them to rebuild when they were 6-21, but not after a 17-4 record did I expect James Harden to request a trade. They were 17-5 over the last 22 games with James Harden on the roster. All in all, I was shocked by the timing of it, but the move does make sense. The Clippers get younger. They added Darius Garland, who has 2 more full years left on his contract. While the Cavaliers, it makes sense on their side, adding a playmaking point guard who's healthy and James Harden, who can help facilitate the offense, bring the ball up, and also make scoring responsibilities easier on Donovan Mitchell. He'll be very good in the pick and roll with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. I was devastated when the news came out, though. Looking back now, it was 2 weeks ago tonight when the news came out that the Clippers were looking to maybe make a trade with James Harden, and then James Harden and the Clippers would be working on which team he would end up waiving his no-trade clause for. It was a tough moment. It was right after the Beanpot semifinal. I remember getting out of that game and seeing the news that the Clippers were going to move on from him. And I was devastated, like I said, when the news came out. It was just a tough moment because the Clippers really were rolling up until that point. They were 17-4 before that news came out. They ended up losing that game that night to the Philadelphia 76ers. And they ended up being, as I said, 17-5 in their last 22 games with James Harden on the roster. But when I look back at that report, 36 to 48 hours after the report came out, James Harden was traded, and reports came out after that it was a positive and mutual parting of ways. With that being said, I still think the timing of it was crazy just because you go from being 17-4 over a 21-game stretch to James Harden sitting out for the second game in a row, and that game being against Philly on that Monday night 2 weeks ago, and then news coming out during that game, during the fourth quarter, that he wants to be traded. It seems like it was an amicable split at the end of the day, with love still being shown on each side. Like I mentioned, the Clippers do get younger, which is important for this team. They need more youth. Garland is a 2-time All-Star guard. It will add more scoring to the Clippers lineup next to Kawhi Leonard, which will alleviate some of the pressure off of Kawhi. When they had a few games without James Harden playing, there was just a lot of pressure on Kawhi to score. Now when you have Garland back healthy after the All-Star break, it should make things a little bit easier on Kawhi Leonard. As for James Harden, he had a terrific season for the Clippers, and he's having a terrific year overall, has played very well so far for the Cavs. He's averaging 25, 5, and 8 on the year. I do think he was an All-Star snub. I'll talk about the All-Star game in another episode, but I thought the All-Star game from yesterday was absolutely fantastic. I'll give my thoughts on that in a different episode. I do want to mention some Ramona Shelburne tweets about James Harden, and these are direct quotes from her Twitter. She said in a tweet, "Just spoke to reflective James Harden, who denied asking for a trade and thanked the Clippers for the opportunity to play for the last 2.5 years in his hometown." And this is a quote from James Harden in her tweet. "In life, not even just basketball, when things don't work out, there are ways to end things in relationships without having to crack each other. Okay, maybe we just didn't see a future with each other. Maybe we just outgrew each other. Whatever the case may be. I feel like other situations weren't like that. And that's why I can respect Steve and L and T. Lou, because they didn't put me in a weird position as much as everybody tried to make it like that." So let me break down that tweet to stop before I mention some other tweets that she had. I think that tweet is big time for me, especially since I was very hurt when the news came out that the Clippers and Harden were working on making that trade 2 weeks ago from today. I just remember seeing that report and thinking, wow, James Harden quit on the Clippers. That ended up not being the case. It was a mutual parting of ways. James Harden has 1 more year left on his contract, which is partially guaranteed. It was a mutual option where the Clippers and James Harden figured it was probably best for both sides to just go their separate ways. And when I saw the report originally that he wanted to leave the Clippers, I thought, because everyone was saying online, that it's just another James Harden situation where he's finding his way out of LA just like he did out of Houston, just like he did out of Brooklyn, just like he did out of Philadelphia. I was just really heartbroken because the Clippers really were figuring things out, right? Like I said, they were 17-5 over their last 22 games with James Harden on the roster, in James Harden's last 19 games. I think the Clippers were 16-3, if I remember correctly. So they were really rolling. I was just shocked by the timing of it, and I thought maybe James Harden just quit on the team because that's what everybody was saying online. It's just another example of James Harden quitting on his team. But that was not the case. That's why this tweet there from Ramona Shelburne is very important because it shows obviously there was a mutual respect still from both sides, and both sides saw it beneficial for each party to move on. And he gives his respect, obviously, in that tweet to Steve Ballmer, the Clippers owner, Lawrence Frank, the GM, and Tyronn Lue, the Clippers head coach. So there was a lot of respect there in that tweet. And then in another note from Ramona Shelburne, she stated, Harden said he went into the Clippers facility this afternoon to get some shots up and get treatment. Everyone knew a trade was imminent, and staffers all came over to say their goodbyes. It was an emotional scene the whole time he was wearing Clippers gear. So it's different than the way things ended for James Harden in other situations. I think that's very evident. This is a different ending in LA than it was in Brooklyn, Houston, and Philadelphia. And then in another note from Ramona Shelburne, she mentioned that Harden said he didn't want to feel like I was holding the Clippers up in their future. I wanted them to actually have a chance to rebuild and get some draft capital. In Cleveland, I see an opportunity to win in the East. They got a very good team, coaching staff, all of the above. So as much as I want to stay in LA and give it a go, I've never won one before. As a basketball mind, I think we have a bit better chance. And at the end of the day, when I'm looking at that tweet from James Harden right there, that quote in that Ramona Shelburne tweet, I think he's right. I think Cleveland has a better chance of winning the NBA Finals right now. The East is a little bit more wide open, in my opinion, than the West, even though the West is a little bit weaker than in the past because Denver and Oklahoma City are both battling injuries. I do think the Eastern Conference is still a little bit more open, and I think right now he does have a better chance of winning the NBA Finals in Cleveland. And now in another note from Shelburne, Harden said of his time in LA, we had a hell of a 2.5 years. We didn't reach the goals that we all wanted to reach, but I think we built some great memories, had some great wins, and fun moments for all of us. Which I see that tweet, and that is definitely the truth. That is definitely the truth. Even though at the end of the day, the Clippers weren't able to get an NBA Finals ring with James Harden, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and Kawhi Leonard all on the same roster, I look back at the memories we had over the last 2.5 years as a fan, and I thoroughly enjoyed James Harden being on the Clippers. I enjoyed so many moments with James Harden having clutch shots, with the Clippers taking Denver to 7 games last year, with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard reviving the Clippers season this year with a 17-5 run after starting the season 6-21. There were a lot of great moments over the last 2.5 years, and I don't regret the Clippers trading with James Harden at all. I remember 2.5 years ago, the main thing I wanted in that October of 2023 was the Clippers to trade for James Harden. They ended up doing so. Within a week after the trade, just about, I saw him play against the Brooklyn Nets in Brooklyn. And then, lo and behold, later down the line, I went back to see him play in Brooklyn. And I also saw them play the Celtics this year in Boston. So I've had the opportunity to see James Harden play in a Clippers uniform 3 times. And those are memories that I'll never trade. Like James Harden mentioned, there were a lot of great memories along the way. Another note that Harden mentions, at the end of the day, it is a business, and I think both sides got what they wanted, are in a great place, and are very happy. I'm excited about Cleveland. I'm still trying to chase my first championship and do whatever it takes to win. That's a great quote there from Shelburne, with James Harden obviously showing that there is an amicable split between each side, and both sides are happy the way things are. Harden, like I did say, has a partially guaranteed contract for the 26-27 season, which the Clippers were not willing to give him an extension and give him the money he wanted. Harden realized that, and that's why right before the deadline, they found a way to work out a deal. In this trade, the Clippers did get Darius Garland, like I mentioned. They also added a second-round pick. There were some reports before the trade went down that the Clippers would have to give a first-round pick in this deal, which I would never have wanted to do. Thankfully, they obviously end up getting a second-round pick in this deal without having to give up one of their own first-round picks in the future, which the Clippers don't really have too many first-round picks to work with in the future, with the next 2 draft picks being controlled by the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then the following 2 draft picks being controlled by the Philadelphia 76ers. So the next 4 first-round picks, the Clippers do not have the rights of full control over any of those 4, so I really didn't want to trade a first-round pick in this deal. James Harden does have a $42.3 million player option for 26-27, but only $13 million of that is guaranteed. So there obviously was a difference between the Clippers and Harden with trying to find an extension, and that ended up being what caused their split. James Harden ends up being the Clippers franchise leader in triple-doubles, And in his last 19 games that he played in for the Clippers, I think the Clippers are 16-3, and he averaged 25 points and 8 assists over that stretch, which really did create a resurgence around this team and gave the fans and the players, and it seems like the entire front office, some hope. And I do think just because the Clippers made this trade, I don't think they're necessarily waving the white flag on the season. When you look at what they got at the trade deadline, they did get younger. They did add some draft picks. I do think it was just a retooling midseason, and I still think they're trying to potentially contend and make a run in the playoffs. And the word potentially, honestly, isn't the best word to use there because, like I said, the Clippers do not own any of their next 2 first-round picks, since those are both going to Oklahoma City, where Oklahoma City owns their first-round pick in 2026. They have swap rights in 2027, and then in 2028, the Sixers own the Clippers' first-round pick, and in 2029, the Sixers have the right to swap with the Clippers in their first-round pick in 2029. So there is no real benefit for the Clippers to tank and try to lose, so they do want to win games. So the Clippers aren't trying to voluntarily lose. I do think it was just a mid-season retooling once James Harden and the Clippers figured out that they weren't going to really have a future after this season. It made sense for James Harden to obviously go to a place where he has a chance to win a ring, and also for the Clippers to get back an asset that's a young player in Darius Garland, who has had a lot of injuries in the past. That's the one thing about Garland's game that's a worry, is his ability to be available and on the floor. But he is a 2-time All-Star. Getting that as your point guard potentially of the future is huge for this Clippers team. I do think it was a retooling. I don't think it was necessarily giving up on the entire season. I think when I first saw that report, I thought it was giving up on the whole season. But now I look at this roster and the way they are constructed, they got younger, they added some potential future draft picks, and they're also still building around Kawhi Leonard, who maybe could have gone and gotten a good return for the Clippers at the deadline. At the end of the day, the Clippers probably didn't see a return that they thought was worth it, and they end up keeping Kawhi Leonard on the roster, which Kawhi Leonard has been unreal for the Clippers over the last 25 games or so. I still think he's a top 5 player in the NBA. I've stayed put on that. I've said that on the podcast before the season began. Kawhi Leonard, when healthy, is still a top 5 player in the NBA, top 7 at worst, and you see him obviously still putting up big numbers for the Clippers and being a big reason in their midseason resurgence. So the Clippers made another deal at the trade deadline. They traded Ivica Zubac, their starting center, to the Indiana Pacers. Zubac was on the Clippers roster, I believe, for 7 years, was the franchise's longest tenured player on the roster. They ended up trading him to the Indiana Pacers alongside Kobe Brown, and in return, the Clippers got Bennedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, a 2029 unprotected first-round pick from the Pacers, the Pacers' first-round pick from 2026, which is protected 1 through 4 and 10 through 30. If it does not fall 5 through 9 this year, it will convert to a 2031 unprotected first-round pick if the Clippers, as I said, do not get the Pacers' first-round pick in 2026. Right now, the Indiana Pacers' 2026 first-round pick has around a 48% chance of being conveyed to the Clippers. So right now, it is a coin flip for the Clippers to get a pick that falls 5 through 9 in this upcoming NBA draft. Zubac still has 2 more full seasons of team control at around $18 million a year, which is an absolute steal for a starting center in today's NBA. Considering his team-friendly deal and the fact that James Harden is now gone, Zoo's value probably would have been less this summer, which is why it made sense for the Clippers to trade him now. He would have less value this summer because he wouldn't have been as productive without James Harden. You're also adding the potential chance of his numbers going down. And at the same time, you're missing out on a potential first-round pick that falls 5 through 9. So that's incredible value for Zoo. Even though Zoo was a productive player and got a lot better over the last couple of years with James Harden, it made sense to make this trade because they're maximizing his trade value and cashing in at the right time when his price was the highest. Zubac does replace Miles Turner in the Pacers lineup, who they lost this last offseason when he went to the Milwaukee Bucks in free agency. Next season, the Pacers will now have Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, Pascal Siakam, and Ivica Zubac all in the same starting lineup, alongside some other good players off the bench, TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin. You're also adding in a potential chance of getting a first-round pick that falls 1 through 4 or 10 through 30. So they're going to have a lot of talent, and all those guys I just mentioned are all under contract through 2028 for the Pacers. So they're still going to be good next season and have a bounce-back year. Potentially, this could have been the year that the Warriors had back in 2020 when they really struggled and ended up landing a top 3 pick, which they ended up taking James Wiseman in a year where Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were hurt. It was kind of a retooling year where they took like a gap year. This is very similar for the Pacers, where They lost in the NBA Finals, just like Golden State lost in the NBA Finals in 2019. The 2019-2020 season ended up being sort of a gap year for them, just like the Pacers losing last year in the NBA Finals. And now the 25-26 season ends up being a gap year for them, where they're potentially adding a top 3 pick to their lineup next season, while also adding a starting center to their lineup to have next to Tyrese Halliburton in the pick and roll next season. I think it's a great return for the Clippers. Mathurin is a guy that I've always been a fan of. He played very well in the NBA Finals this past year. Once Mathurin got to the NBA, I watched a good amount of his first season or two, and I said, wow, this guy's a lot of talent, just really needs to be fully unleashed and let him show his potential. Now when he's in LA on the Clippers, he's going to have a chance to sprout, especially on a roster where now you're looking for more shot opportunities. With James Harden being gone, there's more shot opportunities next to Kawhi Leonard, and Mathurin's going to get some of those opportunities. Darius Garland, when he's healthy, is going to get some of those opportunities. I'm real excited with that return for Ivica Zubac. This season has been a roller coaster for the Clippers, though. There's no other way to put it. A roller coaster is the best word to use. This past summer, the Clippers traded Norman Powell for John Collins, giving the Clippers a starting power forward to let Kawhi Leonard play his natural small forward position. They added Bradley Beal. They added Chris Paul. They added Brook Lopez, all after a 50-32 season last year where they won 50 games in the 2024-2025 season, where they finished 5th in the Western Conference and took the Denver Nuggets to 7 games in the first round. For the most part, last year's team was coming back this year. You lost Amir Coffey in free agency. You traded Norman Powell. And then most of the nucleus from last year was coming back. Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Ivica Zubac, Nick Batum, Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn. A lot of last year's team was coming back heading into 2025-2026. But in the 2025-2026 season, this current year, the Clippers started the year 6-21. 6 wins, 21 losses, which I was very down on the team. I gave up at that point. And that 6-21 record was followed by a 17-4 stretch. And then amid that 17-4 stretch, James Harden and the Clippers had talks behind the scenes about his future, and both sides agreed that it would make sense to move on from James Harden at this point. James Harden ends up leaving, which cascaded into them retooling, which could end up having the Clippers trade Kawhi Leonard this summer. Who knows what the summer will look like for the Clippers. But Kawhi Leonard has been a top 5 player in the game this season, and he's been on an absolute tear, which we saw last night in the All-Star game. He scored 31 points at one point in a 12-minute quarter against Team World. He was amazing last night in that All-Star game, which it makes sense. If the Clippers want to maximize Kawhi Leonard's trade value, this summer could net a really good return for Kawhi Leonard if he's still healthy at that point. And with the way Kawhi Leonard's playing, it would be tough for the Clippers to move on from him. We'll see what the future holds there. But I could have never have seen the Clippers moving on from Harden when they were in the middle of a 17-4 stretch, which ultimately was a 17-3 stretch because that night that it was announced that James Harden and the Clippers were looking at the future, which ended up being Monday, February 2nd. They were playing the Philadelphia 76ers in a night where they ended up losing. Before that game, they were 17-3. I could have never have seen the Clippers moving on from Harden at that point. I couldn't have. That's why when I saw the news, I was very down. And I remember being up late that night, which, as I said, it was the B-Putt semifinal that night. So it's a long night no matter what when you go to both games. And I remember being up late, probably 2 or 3 a.m. And I remember looking at potential James Harden trade packages. And it seemed like it was going to be the Cleveland Cavaliers. The reports were that Garland and James Harden would be involved in a trade where each team would be swapping point guard for point guard. But I remember looking at the other parts of the roster saying, okay, now what can you get for Ivica Zubac? What can you get for Kawhi Leonard? What can you get for Derrick Jones Jr.? I was looking at all of that without realizing the Clippers weren't necessarily just waving the white flag on this season and giving up. It's a mid-season retooling. They're not just necessarily giving up right now. They're being smart, building for the future while also adding current assets that could help them still be competitive this season. But at the end of the day, this split was caused by James Harden and the Clippers not finding a way to come together and find an extension that James Harden wanted. And at the end of the day, James Harden also wants a chance at a ring. So it did make sense of both sides to move on. The Clippers currently, after making these 2 trades and also trading Chris Paul, they are now below the first apron by about $7 million after shipping out Harden, Zoo, Kobe Brown, and Chris Paul. They did turn James Harden, Chris Paul, Kobe Brown, and Ivica Zubac into Darius Garland, who's 26 years old, Bennedict Mathurin, who's 23, Isaiah Jackson, who's 24 years old, 2 first-round picks, with one being potentially very valuable if it falls 5 through 9 this year from the Indiana Pacers. And they also added 2 second-round picks. That's an elite return because the Clippers got younger and also added draft capital. This was the team that was the oldest team in the NBA heading into this season, which was part of the reason I think they started the year very poorly. There were also some things going on behind the scenes, probably with Chris Paul and the Clippers. They just really started the season on a wrong note. And when you have an old team and you're 6-21, it just seemed like the Clippers were at rock bottom and we're never going to figure things out. Which they obviously had a midseason resurgence, figured things out. Now where they currently stand, they're 26-28. They have won 20 of their last 27 games. And they're still going to be competitive even with James Harden being gone. We saw them beat Minnesota without Darius Garland and also without Bennedict Mathurin. And then we saw them beat Houston right before the All-Star break on the second game of a back-to-back without Darius Garland. And that was a game where Kawhi Leonard hit a game-winning shot against the Houston Rockets in a play where he's getting guarded by arguably the best defensive player in the NBA and the most athletic player in the NBA in my eyes, in Amen Thompson. And Kawhi Leonard found a way to get to a spot, have a nice nifty spin move to get some space on Amen Thompson, and then also get the shot off, which ended up being the game-winning shot for the Clippers. So they've found ways to win even without Harden and Zoo gone. They're still going to be competitive and a dangerous team. They do have a few tough games left in February, and then after that, things will get a little bit easier in March. They have 3 games in March against New Orleans. They still have 2 remaining games on the year against Sacramento, 2 left against Dallas, 2 versus Indiana, 2 versus Milwaukee, 1 versus Chicago, 1 versus Memphis. So there are some winnable ball games left. And if you look at this team, they're still a very deep team, a lot of talent. And this is an interesting stat. The Clippers at one point had an 18-6 stretch over 24 games this season, which was the best 24-game stretch in NBA history after being 15-plus games below 500 for a team. So a very impressive midseason turnaround. And part of that turnaround has been playing the young guys. Kobe Sanders, who was an absolute gem of a second-round pick by Lawrence Frank this past NBA draft. Yannick Niederhauser. YKN has been terrific for this Clippers team. And I look forward to him getting more minutes the rest of the season. He's a future star in the NBA. And I saw that on draft night. I knew not really anything about YKN on draft night. But I remember watching his highlight reel after the draft. And I said, wow, this kid brings athleticism. He's young, can jump out the gym, can rebound. There's a lot of raw talent there. But there's a lot of defensive rim protection potential, which the Clippers needed. They've always needed a backup center for years. The Clippers have neglected that. And with YKN, you're getting a guy who can be a lob threat, can be a good rim protector, and is young. I like YKN a lot. He's shown a lot of potential in the minutes he's got this season for the Clippers. Jordan Miller has been huge for this Clippers team. He's a guy that I didn't necessarily give up on, but I didn't believe in like some other Clippers fans. But I give credit to those people that stayed believing in Jordan Miller. He has been awesome for this team. I thought he could get a bucket, especially, if you give him a couple shot opportunities, but I never saw him being, a 15-point per game scorer over a 5 or 6 game stretch like he's been over the last few weeks. He has been awesome. And then Kim Christie has been good in the limited minutes he's got. I've liked what I've seen from him. I think he deserves more minutes. But with this Clippers team getting younger, I think that's important. There's been a ton of team turnover over the last few years for this Clippers team. Only Kawhi Leonard and Jordan Miller remain from the 2024 Clippers playoff team. And that was a team that had Paul George, had James Harden, had Ivica Zubac, had Bones Highland, had Amir Coffey. All of those guys are now gone. With Zubac being gone, like I said, he was on the Clippers for 7 seasons. He was the longest tenured player at the time of the trade. Zoo finishes second all-time in Clippers rebounds, 5th in games played in franchise history, 5th in double-doubles, and 6th in blocks. Had a very good Clippers career, and I wish Zoo all of the best in the future with the Indiana Pacers. Bennedict Mathurin is a restricted free agent this summer, while Isaiah Jackson is under contract for 2 more seasons. Mathurin this year is averaging just about 18 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He's an absolute bucket. He'll be great to have in the lineup. He's going to take some pressure off of Kawhi Leonard, like I said. Mathurin's a slasher. He can get to the bucket, can create his own shot well, Kind of the same thing with Darius Garland. He's going to take some of the offensive pressure off of Kawhi Leonard as well. I'm excited to see what this team looks like when Garland, Mathurin, and Kawhi Leonard are all healthy in the same lineup. Mathurin's a guy I've been a fan of since his rookie year, like I noted. Getting younger is big for this Clippers team. Darius Garland's a guy I'm a big fan of as well. I think at the end of the day, it was very difficult in an emotional couple days getting rid of Zoo and Harden. But I think in the future, this is going to be a very good thing for this Clippers team. It was smart of them to make these trades. Whether or not things work out, if Darius Garland can come back healthy, I think this ends up being a good trade for the Clippers. Who knows what the future holds? Trades can always go south in hindsight. When you look back 5 years later, you could say, why did we make that trade? Why did we only get this in return? So who knows what the future holds? But I think objectively, when you're looking at this trade right now of James Harden and Darius Garland, and then the Zoo trade where you're getting Mathurin, Jackson, and a couple first-round picks from the Indiana Pacers, I think these trades made sense, and I think they were the right moves for this Clippers team to make, even though it's very difficult for Lawrence Frank and this Clippers team to make these moves, especially when the Clippers are rolling at the right time. Like I said, they were really starting to figure things out with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard this season, even though they were 6-21 at one point. They had a nice 17-5 stretch. Now they're 26-28. It was difficult to make those moves, I'm sure, for Lawrence Frank. And as a fan, it was very difficult to move on from James Harden. But I am thankful that James Harden was a Los Angeles Clipper. I'm thankful that I was able to see James Harden share the floor with Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Norman Powell, and Bones Highland, all at the same time, all of those guys being on the same roster. Seeing all of those guys play at the same time in 2023 was truly a treasure and something that I'll always remember and be thankful for. Seeing James Harden play 3 times in person as an LA Clipper, seeing the 17-5 stretch from this past season after being 6-21, seeing the Clippers 27-25 32-game stretch back in the 2023-2024 season. There were so many great memories during the James Harden era in LA, and I know things didn't work out fully where the Clippers, didn't get the ring that they were hoping for when they traded for James Harden. But if I could go back to that October day back in 2023 when the Clippers traded for Harden, I would make that move yet again. Knowing what I know today, even though things necessarily didn't work out, I still think at that time it was the right move for the Clippers to make. With Paul George and James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, the sky was the limit for that team. And then you add Russell Westbrook, Ivica Zubac. There was a lot of talent on that team. It made sense for the Clippers to make that move. And I look back and still think it was the right decision for that Clippers team to make because they gave themselves a chance to win a ring. And I know they weren't able to do that. But like James Harden mentioned, there were a lot of great memories along the way, a lot of great wins. And I can always be thankful for seeing some of my favorite players in the NBA playing the same roster at the same time. James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. Saw them all play in Brooklyn in the same starting lineup. Those are the memories of a lifetime. And I'm thankful I was able to see them play in person. I'm wishing James Harden all of the best in Cleveland. I'm excited to see what he can do there. He's had a very good start to his Cleveland Cavaliers career. I think that Cleveland Cavaliers team is going to be rolling, and I think they're going to be very dangerous in the Eastern Conference. I wish Zoo all of the best in Indiana. I wish Kobe Brown all of the best in Indiana. Kobe Brown's a guy that I think is underrated. I think he deserves more minutes. He's getting some more minutes in Indiana, and he's been shining in those minutes he's gotten for the Pacers. He's a guy that I think is underrated, does a lot of things that may not show up on the stat sheet. He boxes out well, sets screens well. I think he doesn't really get as many shot opportunities as he maybe could get. I think he's a good athletic player who does deserve more minutes, and I'm excited to see what he could do in the future for Indiana. I think he's an expiring contract, if I remember correctly, so he'll end up being a free agent this summer. But I do think Kobe Brown's an underrated player who can be a good player in this league. I really do believe that. So far in 2 games for the Pacers, he's played 19 minutes and 28 minutes with 8 points and 4 points respectively, shooting 5 of 9 from the floor with 13 total rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. He rebounds well for a 6'7" forward. I think he also sets good screens. Also a good defensive player, can play physically. Also has a lot of jump potential. He can get up and make some plays around the rim and potentially slash and get down the lane in transition. I like Kobe Brown. I do think he can be a good player in this league. I'm excited to see what he could do with more minutes on an Indiana Pacers team that is essentially in a gap year for them. The last Clippers trade from the trade deadline was the Clippers trading Chris Paul to the Raptors for the rights to Vana Marinkovic, while the Nets received Ochai Agbaji and a 2032 Raptors second-round pick, with the Raptors receiving Chris Paul in this deal. I like this deal a lot for the Nets. I think Abaji can be a good rotation player in this league. The Nets also added at the trade deadline Josh Minott in a salary dump with the Celtics. I think Minott's an underrated rotation player as well. But to get back to this trade, with this trade, the Clippers freed up 2 standard contract spots, which they ended up using on Kobe Sanders and Jordan Miller, 2 young players that have played very well this season for the Clippers. In this deal, like I mentioned, the Clippers got the rights to Vana Marinkovic, who is a Serbian basketball player who's never played in the NBA. He was the 60th overall pick in the 2019 NBA draft by the Kings. The Clippers end up getting the rights to him, which who knows if he'll end up playing in the NBA, but that's what they got in return here for Chris Paul's contract. Chris Paul, this past week, it was announced that he's retiring from the NBA after 21 seasons. Paul is a 12-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA selection, 9-time All-NBA defensive team selection, 6-time steals champ, 5-time assist champ. He is one of the best basketball players to ever play the game. I do wish things ended better for Chris Paul in his final year in the NBA, but things turned sour between Chris Paul and the Clippers behind the scenes, it seems, according to reports, which ended up him being sent home and never playing in another NBA game after December 1st. So things did not end well for Chris Paul's career. He was still a very productive player last year for the Spurs, and he was supposed to be the backup point guard for this Clippers team and help them off the bench facilitate in a second unit that would include Bogdan Bogdanovic, Nick Batum, Jordan Miller. He was supposed to be that guy to facilitate that second unit. It obviously ends up not going the way the Clippers wanted it to, not going the way Chris Paul wanted it to. They end up splitting. Chris Paul gets sent home in the middle of a night during a road trip, which I think the Clippers are playing in Atlanta that next night. Chris Paul ends up getting sent home. Reports were going out that Chris Paul and the Clippers had their disagreements about the way the Clippers are playing defense, and maybe Chris Paul overstepped his boundaries, according to reports, with the coaching staff. It ends up causing a rift. They end up moving on from Chris Paul, sending him home. They end up trading him just about a month and a half later to the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors end up buying out his contract, essentially, and he ends up retiring from the NBA. This was not the ending to Chris Paul's career that the Clippers envisioned when they signed him this past summer. It was not the ending to his career that Chris Paul envisioned for himself before this summer when he signed with the Clippers. I do really wish things ended better with Chris Paul and the Clippers organization. They were in the midst of, like I said, a 6-21 start of the season. The Clippers management felt like it was the best decision to move on from Chris Paul at that point. They ended up going on a run, a little bit after that. They didn't necessarily go on a run right away after trading Chris Paul. I think they won their next game, then lost 2 in a row after that, and then obviously ended up going on their big-time run and, ends up culminating in them being 26-28 before the All-Star break. But it's just a tough ending to his career. I do really wish things ended better. I wish he got a ring in his career. He's an all-time great player, and I do hope at some point in the future the Clippers are able to honor Chris Paul with the jersey retirement, and I hope Chris Paul is receptive to that as well. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. My next episode, I'll be breaking down some other trades from the trade deadline that weren't Clippers trades, but some other big moves in the NBA. Thank you guys for listening. Much appreciated.